Bruchim Aboim B'Shem Irgen Shir. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's shir from Rabbi Yakov Smith on Kiddush and wine for Kiddush and Untitled Chapter. We would like to have great sources sponsoring a shir. Call Irgen Shir Torah 718-851-8651.
Someone bought an expensive wine for Shabbos, and when he woke up for the Shabbos, in the morning, Shabbos morning, he noticed that the wine was uncovered a whole night. It was a different type of covering. He didn't know that it was uncovered. B'kitzah, he heard that wine that was left uncovered overnight you can't use for Kiddush. And he was surprised because the Shulchan Aruch and Yeridei Kuf Tazayim writes, today we're not choishes for Gilui, for Megula, something left overnight. So why for Kiddush is it worse? Then someone else asked me a question. He enjoys a white wine more than a red wine, and he heard it's not preferable for Kiddush. You're supposed to use a red wine than a white wine. Is that true? I decided now is the time to learn the sugya, the question of wine for Kiddush. Don't forget it's besides Shabbos, but Pesach, and we have a little longer Pesach, Erev Pesach Chal B'Shabbos. So I want to discuss the halachos of wine for Kiddush, Havdalah kosot, grape juice versus wine, the color, and we'll soon see some very interesting type of wines, the matu kal, with a very low percentage of alcohol, or the light grape juice. So as everything, you have to learn the sugya, and then everything is hopefully very clear, Be'ezus Hashem. There's no doubt about it that although Kiddush ala kos, using wine, is only midrabanan, Kiddush deraisa, but Kiddush ala kos is derabanan, but we find Chazal were very focused to make sure that the wine is a good wine. And of course, that the Kiddush should be done properly. Now the Gemara says in Megillah, Daf Chav Zayin Amud Beis, they asked Reb Zakkai, why were you Zayach L'Arichas Yamim? So he said, because he never missed making Kiddush ala Yayin. And the Gemara concludes that when he passed away, he left over 3,000 garve Yayin for his children as Yerusha. So I once saw a cheshbon that if based on a Rashi in Ksubas Kufir Aleph Amud Beis, that a garv is a sa'ah, so it comes out that 3,000 garve yayin equals 24,883 liters of wine. Close to 25,000 liters like the small bottle of soda. That's a lot of wine. That's a new meaning what the Gemara says in Shabbos Chav Gimel Amud Beis, Hazor b'Kiddush Hayom Zoicha Mamale garve yayin. A special schar for being careful with the Kiddush. But what's interesting, and that's important for us, the aside of today, the Gemara in Bava Basra, Daf Tzadik Zayin Amud Aleph at the end, Gemara gives a klal. Ein oim kiddush hayoim el al yayin haroyu linasich lagabi mezbeach. You can't use any old wine. The wine has to be of quality that's good enough for nisach hayayin. Now that's a big chiddush, because nisach hayayin was one of the avodas in Beis Hamikdash. And of course you have to have a good wine. But why should we even think that the wine of Kiddush has to be that quality? So the Rashbam adds a few key words. And he quotes the pasuk in Malachi, Mishum hakriveyu no lafechosecha, which we'll soon see. Basically, you don't just be yotza mitzvah, you have to do it with the best quality. Don't just do to be yotza. And therefore the Gemara is assuming that this applies to the wine of Kiddush also. It's not just any old wine, it has to be the superior quality wine. But then the Gemara goes weiter, and the Gemara qualifies this. Lemute mai, ilema lemute yayin migitoi. Does that mean that you can't use grape juice for Kiddush? Because the Gemara assumed you can't use grape juice for Nesachim. Says the Gemara, you're making a mistake. Because Nesachim, you're allowed to use grape juice b'di'eved. And here's the klal for today. Whatever is pasul in ganzen for Nesachim is pasul for Kiddush wine. But what something is kosher, even b'di'eved for Nesachim, is kosher lekhtchila for Kiddush. And the Gemara gives the following illustration. Therefore, Soichet Adam Eshkol Anavim V'oima Olav Kiddush Hayoim. L'chatchila, the way the Gemara says, you're allowed to use grape juice for Kiddush. You take grapes, squeeze it, it's good for Kiddush. In other words, for Nesachim, it's kosher b'di'eved, but for Kiddush it's kosher l'chatchila. And here we see, without doubt, that grape juice is kosher l'chatchila for Kiddush. Now, of course, the question is, there's no alcoholic content, it's still grape juice. It didn't yet ferment. So that, you look in the Rashbam on Daf Tzadik Zayin and Beis, Yayin Koisim, the Gemara speaks about, is pasul because it will never ferment. So the Rashbam says it's not similar to Yayin Mikitoi, that Soifoi Liois Shaker. In other words, grape juice right now hasn't yet fermented, but leave it, it will ferment. So it's kosher l'chatchila, even though now it is plain grape juice and not wine. That's the Hezbod Mincha Shleim and Siman Dalet. But we see clearly that grape juice is kosher l'chatchila for Kiddush. What we didn't yet explain is, why do we compare wine of Kiddush to Nesachim? Nesachim is an Avoid and Beis HaMikdash. So I saw a beautiful word, Rabbi Yosef Engel, Goyoni Hashas, on our Gemara in Bava Basra says, if you look in the Shiltis and Parshas Yisroi, the Shiltis wonder, since Midaraisi Yotze Kiddush B'Dvarim, why did Chazal require using wine? So he says, because the klal is, of the Shiltis, Ein Oimim Shira Ala Yayin. And Kiddush is a form of Shira. So Zok Rabbi Yosef Engel, Oy Bazoi, Ela Yayin, yeah. So Zok Rabbi Yosef Engel, since the Maisa, Chazal said that the wine of Kiddush we learned from Nesachim, so it has to be similar to the wine of Nesachim. So be that as it may, we insist that it has to be kosher for Nesachim, and that's kosher for Kiddush. And that's why the Torah begins Siman Reish Ayin Beis, Ein Bekatchin El Ayayin Haroi L'Nasech Agabi Mizbeah, which put things in perspective. It has to be a good quality wine. I'll give you one example, which the Torah and Shulchan Aruch and our Siman Ayin Reish Beis gives that mashal. A wine that's starting to spoil, starting to smell. Now, right now, the taste is good, and it's still wine, but it starts to have an unpleasant smell. Zok the Torah and Shulchan Aruch in the beginning of our Siman, that's pasul for Kiddush. Why? It still tastes okay. Zok the Prisha, hakviveyu no lefechasecha. Now, let me explain that. That's the beginning of Malachi. The Navi gives Musa to Klal Yisrael. You bring karbanos of inferior quality, an animal that's blind, or piseach, or chayla, and the Navi turns to Klal Yisrael with great Musa. Take this animal and give it for your sar, for your superior. Will he be happy with it? Will you appease him if you give him cheap quality karbanos? In other words, the message is obvious. For the Rebbeinu Shalom, it has to be superior quality, like you do for your superiors. And this is a very devastating accusation. To do a mitzvah for something that's less than perfect is inappropriate. But it's not just inappropriate. What the Mishnah Berurah says in Sifkat and Aleph, this wine, even though it still tastes okay, but it has an unpleasant smell, is pasul b'di'eved. It's better to use challah for Kiddush than to use the wine that has a unpleasant smell. The Bialacha says, in fact, the Kivei declares, can I use this wine for Havdalah? So Zok the Bialacha, I don't stand up the Shahila. If it's a pasul wine, how could you use it for Havdalah? Hakivei no lefechasecha. But one thing I tell you is certain, a wine that's spoiled, Zok the Ramah, is definitely pasul. In fact, Mr. Berurah says, what's the Chiddush? Madach, an unpleasant smell is pasul, but wine that's spoiled is definitely pasul, even b'di'eved. And I want to just mention, it's not so common to have wine that's spoiled, but sometimes grape juice, if you open it, if it's not airtight, and you leave it out of the refrigerator for a while, it starts to spoil. The Mishnah Berurah says in Reish Ayin Aleph, Sifkat and Ayin Ches, if Lamaisa you made Kiddush thinking that the wine or grape juice was good, and you tasted it, and it's spoiled, so the Mishnah Berurah, you have to make over Kiddush again, another guffin. Unless, he says, when you made Kiddush, you had wine to drink other wine on the table, which wasn't spoiled, then you could quickly grab that wine, drink it for the Kiddush, and you Yotze Kiddush and guffin. But let's say a person knows he only makes Kiddush, he drinks this wine, and that's it. So not only the Gafen was levatala, but the Kiddush you have to make over because it was not a wine. So it's interesting that the Shulchan Aruch in Siv Gimel says, choose a good wine for Kiddush. So you look at the Mishnah Berurah, don't just take any old wine from the wine cellar, make sure it's good. So I was thinking, I'm afraid to say this, maybe this would be a new type of Toyameha. Taste the wine Erev Shabbos. Now why am I afraid to say this? Because from the mitzvah of Toyameha, a little bit cholent, people start eating a pound of cholent, it turns into achila gasa. So then they're going to start making Toyameha Thursday night, they're going to get shikah from the Toyameha of the wine. So let's just make sure the wine is good. Any Suffolk wine, leave it for the suit and you can taste it then. Grada, it's pashit that when you say spoiled wine, it doesn't mean that it's so appalling that a person throws up from it. Wine that's spoiled is not wine. It's not a guffen, it's not kosher for Kiddush. If you have a suffix, if the wine is good or not, so before you make Kiddush, you're allowed to taste it without a bracha, without Kiddush, because te'ima ain't sarach bracha. Is grape juice kosher lechatchila? That's a beferish halacha. That's a Gemara. The Gemara says lechatchila it's kosher for Kiddush. The Magen Avram, Sif Cotton Gimel, adds, but mitzvah b'yayin yoshin. Even though grape juice is kosher, it's like a mitzvah min hamuvcha to use wine. Now, it's interesting. If the Gemara calls lechatchila it's kosher, what do you mean mitzvah min hamuvcha? So I once thought Pshat is based on a chinuch, a mitzvah lamed aleph. The chinuch wonders, if lamaisi yotze kiddush b'dvarim daraisa, why did Chazal require using wine? So he says basically, a person has to be b'simcha always, but especially Shabbos. And he comes Shabbos, and he had a bad week at work, and the stock market went down, and he has enough problems, so he's not going to be happy. So he says, Yayin is ma'oira, Yayin is misameach. So Chazal said, make Kiddush b'dvarim ala kois, and you'll have a freilich Shabbos. No, grape juice doesn't make you any more freilich than before you started with Kiddush. So in other words, there's a mile of using wine that it has that misameach quality to it. But one thing, we have to realize that grape juice is kosher lechatchila. If it ever happens that someone is stuck in a chveis and he got lost and Erev Shabbos, he ended up in some little hick town, there's no kosher store, no kosher anything, so I advise you right away, go to the fruit store, buy a few clusters of grapes, and you become din a Gemara, Seichid Adam Eshkol Anavim, at least you have kosher wine for Kiddush. You might not find bread or anything else, but grape juice is kosher even if it was freshly made. Now, we once discussed this, that today's grape juice is made differently. It's not the typical grape juice that you squeeze that will eventually ferment. Today's commercial grape juice, you can't sell it if it's going to ferment after a few days. So typically the manufacturers cook the grape juice that takes out the natural yeast, and then it won't ferment. So the poskim discussed, maybe our grape juice, since it doesn't have natural yeast and it won't ferment, maybe it's not a guffen, maybe it's not good for Kiddush. But as the Puparav and the Tshuva in Vayan Yosef, Kuf Yud Aleph, and Rav Henkin, and Gvuras Aliyahu, Mem Zayin, Kuf Mem Daled, and Kuf Mem Hey, all say regarding Mamish Al Shayla, that even though the commercial grape juice does not have any natural yeast, but if you leave it in open area, the airborne yeast will settle into the grape juice and eventually will ferment. And that's the Metzias. Even though it doesn't have in it its natural yeast that was taken out when it was cooked, but it does have the potential to eventually ferment, and therefore our grape juice as well is kosher lechatchila for Kiddush. Interesting ha'ora, I saw this for the first time, I learned this week. There was the Sefer Revid Zov, I don't have the Sefer, but I saw the Shabbos B'Shabbat, he quotes it. He was the Av Bezin in Vilna in the time of the Goyin. So you imagine what kind of Goyin he was. So in Parshas Nosai, he says, why taka is Yayin Megita kosher lechatchila? Who said as Hashem Yayin? So he says that the Makar is a pasuk in Parshas Vayeshev, the end of Vayeshev. Because it says there in the dream that the Sarmashkim said, I'll take the grapes, I'll squeeze it out, and I'll serve paroi. So if you tell me that it's not a choshev of mashka, how could the Sarmashkim give that to paroi? So Zeraya, that it's a choshev enough beverage, and therefore it's obviously kosher for Kiddush. Now it's interesting, I don't know what the raya is. Who said it as a Shem Yayin? Maybe paroi like grape juice. But this is what he wants to say, that if the paroi took it, it must be lefechasecha, it's acceptable. So if you want to know the first grape juice in history, taka, that was by parais kais. We'll soon see another significance of this little bit of information. Using grape juice for dalet kaisis has a different problem. Because the emphasis in svara, we would say, madach for kiddush, which be'ika. Kiddush is daraisa, not al kais, but kiddush be'ika is daraisa. Grape juice is kasha lekhtachila. So for dalet kaisis, that's the rabbanon, avada dalet kaisis would be kasha. And indeed, this was the minig of some Gedolei Yisrael. I must mention this. Rav Sternbuch and Chelik Beis, Reish Tun Gimel quotes the minig of the Chazon Ish, Briskerov, Chabinarov, 3 Amudei Oilam, Mamish, Amudei Hayra, that use grape juice for dalet kaisis also. And the emphasis, if it's kosher for Kiddush, avada for dalet kaisis. Rav Chaim Bezalman in Madani Shloima, in the Nuchat print, Amud Kufal Amud Zayin says it's yayin l'chol dava, period. He said he repeated a few times. Zeh yayin, zeh yayin, zeh yayin. However, it's yadua that many people who are not makpid regarding kiddush, they will use grape juice, but when it comes to dalet kaisis, they're makpid on wine. Why is that? So this is for a din in dalet kaisis, not in kiddush, because the Gemara in Pesachim Kuf Ches says if someone has a very strong wine, so strong that it's undrinkable, we'll soon speak about that, then it's not a shtia, it's not a real good wine for dalet kaisis. Why not? So the Rashbam's lashon is, it has to have a chashivas of yayin. It has to be a choshva mashka. The Meiri says, it has to be a shtia mehuderes. What they're saying basically is, in dalet kaisis, besides you have to have a kais of wine, it has to be a derech cheres. It has to be a shtia that's symbolic of derech cheres. And evidently, grape juice, Dr. Rav Moshe and other poskim, even though it's yayin, but it's not a noble drink. You don't serve it by a state party. It's not wine. So, in other words, it is kosher for kiddush. There's no din of derech cheres for kiddush. But for dalet kaisis, many poskim insisted that there's a milah to have wine as opposed to grape juice. This is what I found really geschmack to defend those that do drink grape juice. The Yerushalmi in the beginning of the 10th parak in Pesachim says, where do you know the source of dalet kaisis? So the well-known reason is the 4 lashonos of Geula. But the Yerushalmi then says the 4 times that it says kais in the end of Parashas Vayeshev with the Sarah Mashkim and Paroi. So the Shabbos Shabbat points out correctly, Oy Bazoi, if the whole source of dalet kaisis is from the kais of Paroi, which was grape juice, how can you say grape juice is unacceptable for dalet kaisis? So Lamaisa, I would say, and I think that's the minig, that even those that do not drink wine on for Kiddush during a regular Shabbos do exert themselves to use grape wine for dalet kaisis. Don't forget the Mechaba in Tuf Ayin Bey Sif Yud, based on a Bavli and Yerushalmi, that there were Amarayim that were Moise Nefesh to drink wine for dalet kaisis. They got a headache until Shavuos, Kayadua. So it's worth going the extra mile on Pesach, even if you don't do it on a regular Shabbos or Yom Tiv. If a person can't tolerate the wine, either you could add grape juice to the wine, or drink grape juice. But there is episode svara that dalet kaisis is more chama. The only time when grape juice is different is when you need the alcohol. I'll give you an example. The Mishnah Berurah in Siman Kuf Chav Ches Sif Katan Kuf Mem Aleph says if a kohen drank a revius of grape juice and then he has to duchen by Musaf, he drank it by Shachar, then he forgot about Musaf, he has to duchen. Mishnah Berurah says he could duchen. Why? Even though grape juice is yayin l'chol davar, but it's not mishaker. I'll tell you 2 stories I know personally. It's two really one. A person that I know well, he had a number of girls, and he wanted a ben zacha. So he went to Reb Chaim, he needs a school to have a ben zacha. So Reb Chaim says, what do you make Havdalah on? So he said, grape juice. He goes, no wonder. And he said, look, from now on, make Havdalah on wine, you'll have a ben zacha. Mamash, a year later, this person had a ben zacha. He was a wealthy fellow, so he called Reb Chaim's Gabbai, and he told Reb Chaim's Gabbai, If he comes to America and sounds like my son's bris, I'll give him a blank check made out to $1 million. He can do whatever he wants with it. So Rabbi Chaim responded, tell him if he comes to Bnei Brak, I'll do it for free. Now that's just the cute part of the story. But the geoinus of Rabbi Chaim is, where did Rabbi Chaim get this from? It's in Pharisee Gemara. In Shavuos Daf Yud Chesed Amud Beis, the Gemara says, Hamavdala al yayin b'Mitzvah Shabbos, havin leibanim zecharim. And the Gemara goes on to say, two psukim in Parashas Shmini, lahav ben HaKodesh ben HaChayil, lahav ben HaTameh ben HaTohar, v'samach lei, Parashas Tazriya, Ishik is Tazriya, v'yol dezocha. But here's Rabbi Chaim's geoinus. If the thing is to make Kiddush on the Havdalah al yayin, the grape juice yayin l'chol dava, but not lagabi this segula. Because the Gemara has two psukim. One of them is lahav ben HaTameh ben HaTohar, Perik Yud Pasuk Yud Aleph, and Rashi says, but someone that's a shikar can't paskin. He can't be mavdal tamei and tar. So Reb Chaim said, "Vaysterreis the school of yayin is only a yayin that's mishaker. So grape juice, you don't have that school." But I want to add, if I'm allowed to, the Ben Yehoyada on this Gemara points out that the gematria of Zochar is 227. The gematria of Nekeva is 157. The difference is 70, which is exactly the gematria of yayin. So, Lamaisa, I said this story rather recently, somebody else, and in Gaman Kiboti says, I read this school of Rabbi Chaim in the Olam Trufa, and I wanted a benzocha, and I started making on wine, and I said 9 months later, I can mamish swear to you, I had a benzocha, and I saved $1 million. That's so interestingly enough, it's a skula, but it's the Havana is, even though it's yayin l'chol dava, but not lagabi this skula. Okay, next question it starts to become a little more tricky. The question we began with, a person left wine uncovered overnight, what's the problem? I mean, there is a minig of the Gra and Eretz Yisrael, many of Choshes that they don't use megula, anything left uncovered, but most people, especially in America, we're not Choshes, so why should Kiddush wine be different? So the emphasis is a Gemara, our Gemara in Bava Basra, Tzadik Zayin Amud Beis. The Gemara says megula, even if you strained out the possible poison in it, it's possible for Kiddush. And the Shulchan Aruch in our Simon Sif Aleph, Yayin Eim Mekachin Loyal Megula Afilu Idnot Loy Kaptinan Agiloi. So the Mechaber himself already points out that for some reason wine Megula is not good for Kiddush, even though Megula is not a problem. So the question is, what's Taka the Chilik? So that maybe the teretz would be, even though Megula is kosher, but it's still not choshev enough. Maybe Akerveyu no lefechosecha. Taka the Taz and the Pri Megadim say that. But it seems a little more to this. The Divrei Malkiel, in a very important tshuva in the beginning of Chelik Dalet Siman Aleph, he says, even if there's no problem of a snake depositing poison like the typical gilui, but leaving something uncovered, maybe impurities, maybe a mosquito, an insect will fall in. And he quotes a Gemara of Adar Daf Lamed. So he says, even though it's not os, it's not sakana, because there's no poisonous snake, but it's still not a choshev mashka. It's not sterile, it's not clean. Then I saw, really, the Magen Avram seems to say this, that his lashon is nomer reichai v'taima. If you leave wine uncovered, I don't know the English word, it gets eisgewebt. A bad muscle, but soda that's flat. It just loses its chshivas. Wine doesn't have, seltzer, it doesn't have, the carbonation is, but it loses its chshivas when it's left uncovered. That's the Magen Avram on our Machab. But what's noteworthy, the Sefer Toras Chaim, on that Gemara Bava Basra, one of the earliest Achrayim, he says an incredible yisoid. And he also was bothered, why is there a problem if Yayin Megula, if Lamaisa it's not Sakana? So he says it's Yadua, that the Shabbos Suda, the whole Shabbos is Keneged Yom Shekulei Shabbos. And that's the side of Zachar V'Shamar. Now listen to this. And he says that the whole Shabbos has to be the Keneged the Yayin HaMeshuma, that's Mechusa, Tomei V'Goniz. So it's not because it's Sakana. But the Shabbos and the Shabbos Kiddush has to be a Yayin Mishuma. And he says that's why of a bad smell, V'Shulchan Aruch Paskins is puzzle. It's not so terrible. But he says it's Yedua that Ruchni and Reichni smell and ruchnis is one of the same. So if it doesn't have, the ikas char is a reach toiv. So wine that's a reach loy toiv is inappropriate. And as he's saying that the Sudas Shabbos has to be similar to the Sudas la'asad lavai the Yom Shekulei Shabbos. But we haven't finished. A later going, the Taisvis Shabbos, one of the Mefarshim on Shulchan Aruch, in the end of Reish Mem Beis, the Ramah says you're supposed to eat mulaisa, which we call kugel, but it's not really kugel. Mulaisa means like a meat pie, top and bottom of a crust, and the middle is meat. You have to eat that mulaisa zeichel lamon that was mechusel lamayla lamata. So everybody asks, why do you make on Shabbos zeichel lamon if fakert on Shabbos the mon didn't fall? So Zakti Taisvis Shabbos, the answer is based on the Teiras Chaim. And listen how he applies it. Since the Teiras Chaim says the Sudas Shabbos has to be similar to the Sudas Lasud Lavoi, that's why we have meat and fish, Dumya to the Sharabor and Leviasan. And that's why we have to have Yayin Mishuma. And that's why we have to have the mon, because it says that Rekia Shechakim, Shebay Shayachim Mon L'Tzadikim L'Asad Lavoi. The ultimate schar will be mon. So basically, as we always say, Yoisim Imashakris L'Fneichem Kesuvchem Kan. There's no little old me in Yiddishkeit. Everybody is important. We have by Yasuda Shabbos, the fish, the meat, the kugel, the smell, the reach of the wine, and the quality of the wine is supposed to replicate the Sudas La'asud Lavoi. So therefore, it makes sense that even if it's not puzzle or treif, it has to have a positive quality of being a Yayin HaMeshumah. Okay. So now to apply this Lamaisa, I think it should be pashit that what the Magen Avraham says, if you leave wine just a shamu etes, the wine is still kosher. Now that stems with all the reasons except for the Teres Chaim. Because like the Teres Chaim's reason is not just that it was uncovered and something happened to it. It has to be meshuma. And I'll tell you something fascinating. I saw this in a number of the Gedolei Achrayim, the Taisvis Shabbos, the Big Day Yesha, and others all say that's taka why. If wine was left uncovered for a short time, the wine is kosher halacha. But Medagdagim will not use that wine for Kiddush. Especially by Chassidim, it's a very big pay that to cover wine immediately. That's not mitzad halacha. Magen Avraham is Michael by Shamu Etes. But that's to satisfy the reason of the Teres Chaim Taisvis Shabbos, that it has to be a positive yayin mishuma, not because it was something got ruined. A positive yayin mishuma, even a small time is no good. Rather, it's noteworthy that Chayodam in Klal Vav Siv Zayin, and Mr. Burr quotes it, says L'chatchila, you should not leave wine uncovered at all. So we could say la'alacha, you could be mekel if it was a shamu etes, but yidna makbet to keep the wine. And in other words, people that, especially al pisoi, they'll fill up the wine with the kiddush, and before they make kiddush, they will close the wine bottle, even though they're going to use the wine bottle to pour from that after kiddush. You're leaving it for 2 minutes uncovered, but it has to be covered. La'alacha, the Aruch HaShulchan says, if you left wine uncovered overnight, you can't use it for kiddush. It's puzzle. Now let me be very clear. It's not treif. Yayin Gilui in times of the Gemara was sakana. You're not allowed to drink it even on Tuesday morning. Yayin that was left overnight is not treif. It's puzzle for kiddush, but it's not treif. So get a different wine and use that wine by the Suda, but it's not treif. Now, it's interesting, the Lashon of Magen Avraham is Shamu Etes is okay. What does that mean? Shamu Etes. How do you define Shamu Etes? So the Tzais HaShulchan in Memvav, Sif Cotton Beis, quotes his Zayda that said 3 or 4 hours is Zicha, no problem. And his Rayis from the Seder night. Listen to an Einfeld. The Seder night, we fill up the second kais right after the first kais. When do we eventually drink it? Hours later. So 3 or 4 hours is Shamu Etes. The question is more than 3 or 4 hours. So the Divrei Malkiel, as I mentioned earlier, was a Yisayis Diketshuva, and he wants to say that the main reason is either impurities will settle into the wine, or, as we said, it gets oisgewebt. So he says a few hours, even more than 3 or 4 hours, really shouldn't be a problem. But he says the question is did it lose its quality? So it's totally in minik hamokim. If people leave wine typically a few hours uncovered, it's also okay. And it's hard to give a share, but if you know that the wine doesn't get spoiled, doesn't lose its tam, and it's not in a dirty place, even more than 3 or 4 hours, you could be makel. One thing I will say, maybe I say a few points, people typically don't drink the kosher Pesach by night, and they keep it on the table for the next day Kiddush. That's a problem. That's overnight. Now you want to say maybe Leil and Meshumah, you don't have to worry about it. I didn't find that in Paiskim. So there's a simple eitzah, and that is take a tissue or any cover and cover it. The Chazon Ish, in Shmir Seguf HaNefesh, and Kuf Chavav says to cover it you don't need a airtight, heavy cover. Even a paper tissue would be enough to cover it. So if you want to use the kosher liyot for the day Kiddush, cover it, and that's fine. If you use wine for benching by Sudash Shlishis, of course you don't drink the wine typically, and you use it for Havdalah, so that would be a shamu etes. You don't have to cover it from Shalshudas benching till Ma'ariv. After Ma'ariv is a shamu etes. We had a shayla, someone put a good wine in the refrigerator that he opened one Shabbos. The next Shabbos he wanted to use it for Kiddush, and he realized that they put it back in the refrigerator uncovered. Again, sometimes it happens, and maybe the cover fell off. Whatever the story was, it sat a week in the refrigerator uncovered. That I saw from the Kaf HaChaim, the Chazon Ish, and the Sinkarels. All the Paiskim seem to agree unanimously that even though there's no cover on the bottle, but it's in a refrigerator, there's no giloi, there's no impurities, it's not nomarechoi. You could clarify the svar of the Teiras Chaim. Is that considered yayin hameshuma? Maybe tak it is. If it's in a refrigerator, it's in a closed, sealed area. But definitely we could say in a refrigerator, even an extended period, even a week or more, is still enough yayin mishumar that it would not be a problem using it for Kiddush. Another interesting question is the color of a wine. Is there any difference red wine versus white wine? So we would say, since when is color a factor? Al testakol b'yayin, b'kankal mashe b'soichay. But this is mamish our sugya, believe it or not. The Gemara in Bava Basra, our sugya, Tzadik Zayin Amid Beis, a bayrik wine is kosher b'di'eved. What is a bayrik? Rashi is lavan. It's a white wine. So we see it's kosher b'di'eved. What's taka de pshat? What's wrong with white wine? We'll soon see. But then a few lines later, the Gemara said the following very important statement. Boy, minei Rav Kahana, chivrin mahu. What's the halach with white wine? So Amalei, it's a fair pasuk in Mishlei. Altera yayin ki Adam. And the Rashbam explains, don't you know that wine is red? The color of wine is red. Altera yayin ki Adam. And as the Ramban on that Gemara points out, wine that's not red is not wine. I would say a lashon, it's not the cheftza of wine. I don't mean to be lumdish, but the Ramban's lashon is that einay kari yayin ela edaim, and is mashma afilu b'di eved, you're not yotze with a white wine, because the cheftza of wine is red, and white wine is not wine. As I state in Ramban, based on a Gemara. Now this is a shita of a number of Rishonim, you should know. The only question is, the Gemara, we said, bayrik, white wine is kosher. So the Ramban, Bavarans, that he says, it's not bayrik, it's baydek with a dalid. And that means a wine that's too strong. But white wines of the Ramban is pasul. And that's the shita of other Rishonim. However, Tosfos and the Rashbam learn a different pshat. And basically, the chiluk is, regular white wine is okay. A very white wine, a distinctly white wine is pasul. So here we have a machlekes rishonim if white wine is pasul b'di'eved or it's kosher. Now what's noteworthy, the Rishalmi in Shkolim Perek Gimel halacha beis mitzvah lotzeis b'yayin or adaim calls this pasik. So Zokti Beis Yosef and our simin from the lashon of mitzvah is mashma that the Yerushalmi implies that white wine is not pasul, not like the Ramban. How do we paskin? So we think, well, I'm sure it's no problem. So the Mechaben Siv Dalet mit mekachin al yayin lavan ula Ramban poisel the kiddush afilu b'di'eved, and the Mechabes Messiah the minig ha'olam kisvar rishayna. So it's not just like a non-issue. The Mechaba makes more than honorable mention of the Ramban Shita. The minig is that we use white wine, that's true. But there is a Ramban Zashita that white wine is pasul even b'diavad for Kiddush. The Mishnah Berurah spells it out. L'chatchila, all agree, try to get a red wine. If you don't like red wine, only white wine, then it's fine. So basically, I should say, another point also, because it's a Mechaber Shulchan Aruch, it's noteworthy, in Kuf Ayin Hey Siv Beis, the Mechaber said that white wine is more healthy than red wine. Marsha and Ksubis Kuf Yidal said the same thing as well. So for those that prefer white wine because it's more healthy, it would be the same like we just said. If it's a big difference the white or the red, then white is fine. But if it's a question of two wines, white or red, and both are okay, it's preferable to use red wine for Kiddush. Now, Lamaisa, most wines are not really white, they're yellow. But it doesn't really help much, because if the halacha is that the hefza of wine is red, yellow is not red. What we could say is some wines are not very red, a light red. Light red is also good enough. Many wines are purple or blue or black, so that's probably red plus. But definitely, there's no doubt about it, that in Hilchas Kiddush there's a milah to use red wine. In Hilchas Pesach, Tov Ayin Beis Yud Aleph, the Mechaber says mitzvah to have red wine. But that's more than just regular Kiddush. Besides the fact that the hefza of wine is red, the Magen Avraham is quick to add Zeichel Adam. Now, these two words, Zeichel Adam, has a lot of meaning. The Mishnah Berurah says the dam that Parai bathed in the Yiddish children's blood. The Pri Megadim says Zeichel to the Makkah's dam. The Chukas HaPesach, a contemporary of the Beis Yosef, says Zeichel to Dam Mila and Dam Pesach. The Kitzah, there's much symbolism in Zeichel, and to have red wine on Pesach, Zeichel Adam. So now we have two halachos. For Kiddush, red wine is a maila. For Dalit Kaisais, red wine is a maila, plus it's a din in Dalit Kaisais, Zeichel Adam. Now why do I stress this? Because I've heard this more than once. Someone says, I like white wine better, but I want to have the hid of red, so I put either a little bit red wine in, or if he's a little more creative, he has kosher Pesach food coloring, and he puts that into his white wine. So that is not going to help. Because if the reason that you have to have red wine is the hefza of wine is red, not white, so you took a wine that's pasul and you colored it. So Shlomo Zalman in the beginning of in Shulchan Shlomo, the beginning of Siman Reish Ayin Bey, says that would be analogous to someone that has a real black spot on his esrig, but he takes paint and paints it over gorgeous yellow and no one sees. Who are you fooling? It's pasul. So you can't kasher pasul wine by putting in food coloring, or even on regular wine. But on Pesach, where the additional factor is to have red wine that's symbolic of the various types of damim, for that it would help coloring it. So food coloring might help for the Pesach issue, but not for the regular Kaishel Bracha Kiddush issue. Now again, white wine is not kefelach. Again, if you like white wine better, it's still good, it's fine. But it's not going to help to color it by adding red wine. What's interesting, the Shulchan Aruch says you're allowed to make Havdalah on the white wine, even like the Ramban. It's not the hefza of wine. So Mishnah Berurah explains, because Laigara from Chamar Medina, schnapps is also not red. So Mishnah Berurah adds something I think is important to mention. If you hold that it's kosher for Havdalah because it's Laigara from Chamar Medina, then you could also use the white wine for Kiddush Day. Now why do I say this? Because people take a light white wine, but they won't even mahad the Friday night. So I guess you could have somewhat of a consolation. The eighth is use red wine for Kiddush Friday night, and Shabbos Day you could use the white wine. There's more studly makel Shabbos Day. Some people like a change. They want red wine once, white wine here. So if you do it correctly, red wine Friday night and white wine for Shabbos Day, then you have an additional svar to be makel Laigara from a Chamar Medina. Another important halacha that it's kedai to mention in the halachas of the kashas of wine, is there an inyan to have dafka non-mevushal wine? Now the emphasis, when you hear that, you wonder, Adar, I know mevushal is a maila, because if a guy pours wine, it's yayin nesech. very chama to ge'issa. It's asabana even. So we try to get mavushal. Why should Kiddush, yayin, mavushal be a chesaron? So the answer is Adar, senes. Why taka is yayin mavushal not a problem of if the guy pours it? It's yayin nesech. So Rashi in the end of Avodah Zarah of Chavdala Beis says because the goyim don't use yayin mavushal for their Avodah Zarah. So you don't have to be worried about yayin nesech. So if it's a chesar in the wine, it's not chashiv for a guy. How could we use wine that's mavushal? This is a literal hakiveino lefechasecha. They don't use it, and we should use it for our kiddush lahavdil. And that's why there are gedolei rishonim that hold that wine that's mavushal is possible for kiddush. In fact, there are shitas in rishonim that it so much affects the quality of the wine that on yayin mavushal is no longer bar priagafen, but the brach is shahako. The shita of the Rosh, Bava Basra, the Ramban, and most notably the Rambam in Chavtes Yudalid, you can't use wine that's pasul, and one wine that's pasul is yayin mavushal. So therefore, the fact that it's a maila by yayin nesech is why it's a chesar in Lagabi Hilchos Kiddush. However, there are shitas in Rishonim that say that is not a problem. And it could be a shtickle of machlokes in Metzias, but the Aruch HaShulchan and Sif Tes says that the reason why it's possible in the Nesachim is not mibnei griyusai, because the Mishnah says in Trumais that yayin mavushal is a better quality. Now, this is what I saw. It has to be a machlokes in Metzias. But at the end of the day, there's a machlokes Rishonim if mavushal is pasul b'diavad for Kiddush or is it kosher lechatchila. The Shulchan Aruch by us in Sif Ches paskins mekachin al yayin mavushal v'yesh aymish ein mekachin aleihem v'aminig zok dermod lekadish alav. Unless you have a non-mavushal wine that's of this similar quality, you're allowed to use a yayin she'ein mavushal. A yayin that's mavushal. I'm sorry. In Hilchos Pesach, Tov Ayin Beis Yud Beis, the Mechaba only mentions the shita that yayin mavushal is kosher for dalakaisis. Doesn't mention the machmirim. If you look in Reish Beis Aleph in Hilchos Brachos, the Mechabas a chiddush. Yayin, you make a gafen, whether it's chai, whether mavushal. What's the chiddush? There's a big chiddush. He's saying the like rishonim that it's a shakal nibidvaray. So lamaisa, we could say the following: when someone wants to make kiddush and he wants to do a lechatchila, and there's no difference or not much of a difference, so buy a non-mavushal. I'll give you a simple example. Grape juice has 3 types that they sell in the market. It says in big letters, ein mavushal, big letters, mavushal, and some grape juice does not say anything. Let me explain. If it says ein mavushal, it's non-mavushal l'chol hadayis. If it says mavushal, it's mavushal l'chol hadayis. If it says nothing, it's a machlokes between the Ramosh and the Tzeil Merav. If this particular type of wine is mavushal or not, so the Kedem company, Bomakim Rekaimam, they don't paskin, so they don't write anything, so you could do what you want. But if you could buy 2 wines, in the glass bottle, the 50 ounce is ein mavushal, and in the plastic bottles is mavushal, so why not buy the ein mavushal? Don't forget, all agree it's a maila in ein mavushal. If there's a very big difference in quality, so then you can be maker like the Ramah says. Wine is the same thing. You want to buy a good wine, so look at the bottle and see if I get an ein mavushal, that would be preferable. Now, if you have a simcha or a place where goyim are working and you're worried about the wine becoming yayin nesech, so then you can't be machmir in Hilchos Kiddush if you're going to end up being over in Hilchos Kashrus. So you have to be machmir in Hilchos Kashrus, and you'll have to give up the chumrah of yayin she'ein mavushal, or for Kiddush you'll have a special bottle and you'll keep it out of sight or out of reach of the goyish workers. Another point I wanted to mention is the question of what's considered mavushal is not for now. We discussed it a different time, but pasteurization is a big machlokes if it's considered enough to be mavushal. But our pasteurization, which is flash pasteurization, which basically they pass the wine through pipes and it's heated to an intense temperature, but it's and they add a lot of to make it cold. They cool it kamat simultaneously. In other words, it's heated and cooled simultaneously. So the wine is unaffected as far as the bishul is concerned. It's heated but not bishul. So the paischa, that would not qualify to be considered yayin mavushal, l'kul or l'chumra. It's not a hetan yayin mavushal, and gabi hilchas kiddush is not considered mavushal. So it's basically one shayla, is it mavushal or not? The next question is also very informative. Is there a mile to have an unsweetened wine? In other words, some wine it says no sugar added, and some wine doesn't say that, or it says yes, there is certain sweetness. So the emphasis in svara, adarabba, if you have a sweetener added, it's a better quality, so it should be a bigger mila. And that's the sheet of many rishonim, that a sweetened wine is gora mila. What's wrong? But here's the chiddush of the Rambam. The same Rambam, Chavtes Yudalid, you said the Rambam says, "Ein bekatchen el yayin haroyel nasga b'mizbeach." If they added a drop of devash or sa'ar, afilu a drop to a chavis gedoyla, you can't use that for kiddush. Why? So listen to the Rambam's chiddush. Since the pasuk says chol sar v'chol dvash leisaktiu mimenu, legabi the mizbeach, even a drop of devash passos. So the Rambam says, since the Gemara Bava Basra says that the yayin for kiddush has to be dumya to the nesachim, so even a drop that's typically bottle is pasol for kiddush. Now, you have to realize devash is lav dafka devash honey. Rashi al Torah says kol masikas apri kari devash. So like this Rambam, if you have wine that's flavored by sugar, it's pasol b'di'evet for kiddush. However, there's a big makom l'chalek. Bishleim yayin mevushal or giloi or a bad smell, it's a chesaron in the quality of wine. I could say you can't use it for kiddush, but the flavoring that's added only enhances the taste of the wine. For the mizbeach is pasol, that's a din in the mizbeach. But my Shabbos Suda is not a mizbeach. And you know what's noteworthy, probably unprecedented? The Rambam himself says, I paskin that it's pasol. But I know many argue, yesh misha matir, and they say, what does a psul that's miyuchet for the mizbeach have to do with yayin of kiddush? In other words, if it's a chesaron in the chefts of wine, then it's pasol for kiddush. The quality of wine is pasol for kiddush. But this is just a din of mizbeach. But the Rambam holds by his shita that if it's any flavoring added, is pasol b'di'evet. But the Ramban and Bava Basra use a very strong lashon that if it's flavoring added, it's kosher ve'ein lahashiv. Don't even argue. More so the Meiri and Bava Basra, he says also a stark lashon hadvar matmiyim. Those are machmir, and if not that they wrote it, I wouldn't believe someone wrote such a thing, because it's not. Why is that affecting the quality of the wine of kiddush? So here we have a machlokes gedoyle rishonim, like the Rambam usiyatoi, not only devash but sugar added is pasol. And taka, if someone has a little bit of wine, I saw this Shabbos Shabbat points this out, a little bit of wine in his becher from someone else to make kiddush, and he pours his wine that has no sugar added because he's makbid like the Rambam into that drop of wine, like the Rambam, it's pasol, because the Rambam says even a drop is pasol. There's no chatzi drop. So those that are makbid to have unsweetened wine based on this Rambam shita. And then Pri Megadim in Mishpei Zav Sif Cotton Gimel spells out lav dafka devash, even sukkar is also pasol if it's added to wine. However, the Mechaber in Siv Ches brings these dayis, v'aminig l'kadosh alav, unless the other wine is a better quality. So we see it's not a vilda chumrah to look for dafka unsweetened wine, but l'halacha, if the sweetened wine is better, then l'chatchil you can make kiddush on that sweetened wine. Rav Sternbuch in his Tshuvas in Chelik Beis, in Chelik Aleph, Reish Don Gimel points out sometimes people want to be machmir and comes out to be a kula, because they want to have unsweetened wine. Now typically unsweetened wine doesn't have a very good taste. It's almost, he says, almost tastes like vinegar. So then you have for a hiddah, you're giving up a quality wine. He says, if you don't enjoy the taste of a very dry wine, then stay with your flavored, your sweetened wine, and it's kosher like most rishonim. And that's the Ramaz made, that's the minik. Now here I want to answer a question that I had for a long time, but it teaches me, like I always learn, you have a good kash until you learn the sugya. And everything's mefuresh once you learn. Many people are makbid to get non-mevushal wine for Kiddush. But the same group of people, most of them don't even think of getting dafka unsweetened wine. It's the same Rambam. The teretz is it comes the same Rambam. But you can't compare the two chumras. Because a mevushal wine is a chasar in the quality of wine. That's takaposel. The chasar of flavored wine, the Rambam himself acknowledges that the many paiskim are mekel. And the Meiri and the Ramban can't believe there's such a chumrah. So even though the Rambam pastels both, and if you go with the Rambam Shita, you have to have non-mevushal and non-flavor added, but at least we could say many Rishonim would hold that mevushal is pastel, but flavor is an island. So therefore, if you do see people are makban on one at the other, I understand where they're coming from. Here's a question, a tricky question. A person has grape juice without sugar added. Many grapes are like that. But he has a wine that has sugar added. Which is preferable for Kiddush? So I would have thought, well, if grape juice is yayin l'chol davar, so use that. It has no sugar added. But it's possible to say, like the Magen Avram that says that there's a maila, wine is still preferable over grape juice. It's possible that the maila of wine that's flavored, which is kosher like many shitas, would be better than grape juice without any sugar added. Another point, someone asked me, I don't hear the big shaila, but sparkling grape juice, is anything wrong with that? I told him nothing wrong with that. It's basically just carbonation, and the Shevet HaKasi and Dalit, Peiches, says it's kosher לכתחלה, and it has sugar added, that's a different issue, but it's not a problem. Someone also asked, he wanted to use, he likes peach-flavored grape juice. Is it kosher for Kiddush? So I told him, Mechaber says in the beginning of Reish Beis, if you have a konditin wine that's 1/3 pilpulin, it's kosher. Pilpulin is pepper, as in peppercorns, as in, so imagine 1/3 of the wine is pepper, it's kosher. Obviously flavored wine is okay. So certainly if you have peach-flavored grape juice, it's fine. Another big sugya is the adding water to wine or grape juice. So that we discussed in a different time, but basically you have to realize the following. Mitzara din ha-gemara, their wines was so strong that you couldn't drink it unless you diluted it. 1 part wine, 3 parts water. Kiddush pellet, that's what it was. 1 part wine, 3 parts water. That was those days. The Paiskim, the Ramah and Shulchan Aruch already bavarns, and Reish Ayin Beis Hey, that our wines are not as strong and better don't dilute them. So ideally one should drink the wine as it is. The question is, some people find it hard to drink wine. So I think to give a klal would be wrong because there are so many variables in wine. Some wines are stronger than others. Some wines have up to 33% liquid sugar added before you touch it. So it is no klal. Rav Vosda's klal in his chuvas and chelik yutzim and membei is a perfect klal. Ein litin klal bezeh. Because there are too many variables. He said, just make sure you don't dilute it to a point that it's no longer a guffen. Because you make it into a grape drink, then it's a shakel. It's a kiddush. So I think we could say that adding water to wine, you could add water, because our wine still have a lot of strength to it, but make sure you know that it still has a strong enough discernible taste of wine. Adding water to grape juice, Rabbi Mizalman says even a little bit is mekalkel the time of the grape juice. Partially because it's not as strong as wine. So I would say 2 things. If someone wants to add to wine, it's better to add grape juice to wine than adding water. Adding to grape juice is more of an issue, and I'll give you a simple halacha l'maisa. Sometimes a person is short on grape juice and he wants to use it for Kiddush. He has a big becha, 6-ounce becha, and he has 4 ounces of grape juice. So he can make Kiddush as it is, or add 2 ounces of water. It's probably better not to be makbid on a kais mole, which the Reish Ayin Aleph, Mr. Brewer says in Sifkat and Membeis, is not ma'akiv Kiddush. To add 2 ounces to 4 ounces of grape juice might not be grape juice any longer. So you're losing more than you gain. It's better to make on an unfull kais, but at least you have pure grape juice. The issue of a guy looking at the wine, does that passel for Kiddush, I found fascinating. I'll tell you why. Bemis, if a guy looks at wine, it's not yayin nesach, that's pashut. If he touches it, it's not yayin nesach, unless he shakes it or pours it, but we know the halachos, but looking is zicha not yayin nesach. So where did this come from? So this is based on a shla, in the new print, it's chelik aleph, on shin mem vav. The shla quotes, Rabbi Nachum HaBavli, it was a bendori of the Beis Yosef, that he says that Anshe Ma'isa, who are Makayim Kedoshim Tiyu, will not use wine that a guy looked at, because with their re'iyah, they have the ability to make it yayin nesach. And the shla concludes, it's only a chumrah bi'alma, but Anshe Ma'isa are makbid, als Kedoshim Tiyu. That is not the makar of our minig, because this shla has nothing to do with Kiddush. This shla says that we have to treat a yayin that a guy looked at as yayin nesach. So you can't drink it on Tuesday afternoon either. Another source, and that's the Chavasiyar in his Sefer Mekar Chaim in Kuf Pei Gimel, the end of Sif Aleph. Midas Chasidus lahakbid b'koishel bracha al estaklis goy b'al estaklis nida b'kolshke minigiyasa. So here this is more custom made for a case of Kiddush, koishel bracha. But he also includes nida. Now many people have, the nashim are often nidas. So that's why both these mekayres are not really our minig. It seems the minig of dafka makbit for Kiddush is a little of both, but it's really our sugim where we started from. There's a certain zehiras that Yidden have for the case of Kiddush. So we're not makbit gabi nida. We're not makbit to call it yayin nesach, that's also even b'hana, but we try to have the yayin of Kiddush, a guy shouldn't look at it. This would explain why many people are not makbit, because if it's the Shlomo Stolf writes, Kaddish Yaimalai, and it's only a din of a hidur. For those that are makbid, you'll see different minhagim. Lamashal, the Shinava, this is in the Divrei Yecheskel in the back, he says, if it's a sealed bottle and the guy looked at it, there's no problem. Because Yayin Nesach is no problem. But many people are makbid. If the Yayin is mavushal and the guy looked at it, so again, how could it be a problem? But then again, many people are makbid. I once asked someone, you're makbid, a guy never looked at the bottle even close. So how do you buy wine? Maybe the guy in the store. So he said, I go straight to the manufacturer. I buy cases, closed boxes of wine. So here it's interesting that people have their own chumras. It's wonderful. But if you understand that it's only a hidur, so ain't gvul a hidur. I want to be makbid. What I would make a point I think is kedai to mention, often we have irreligious guests, whether it's a relative or a guest, or we have a waiter, and many people make a big tumult that he should now look at the wine, which is terribly embarrassing to this Acheinu B'nai Yisrael. You're treating him like a guy. But the emes, the whole thing doesn't begin, because it's only a chumrah, it's only a hidur regarding the eyes of a guy. Now, even by a mumala mahachis, so there are shitas that makes it yayin nesach. But a mumala teyavain, Khalil is not a guy. And I saw from two Kedoshei Elyon, the Alta Skverev and the Alta Barala Belza, who both said that even if you're makbid not to use wine that a guy looked at, are not makbid regarding Acheinu B'nai Yisrael. Why not be machmir? Because you're going to do more damage than good. So this, as we see, is only a hidur and has to have the right perspective. Let me leave you three ha'aras that I think are important to mention. First of all, they started manufacturing a number of years ago what's called grape juice from concentrate. Now basically, it was a big savings for the manufacturer who make wine, let's say in California, and you have to ship all the wine to New York, so the shipping costs are exorbitant. So they have a great idea. They will take out all the water content from the wine or grape juice. It sometimes can be up to 80% of natural water. You ship the jelly, the grape juice jelly to New York, and you add the 80% back, so you have the same grape juice. It's a dar of gilgulim. Why not make a gilgul out of the grape juice? So, how could you go wrong? But most poskim said that's a problem, because you're adding up two zeros. Because 80% water is a himmel geshayinish. You can't add 80% water to grape juice. You have the grape jelly. Grape jelly is also possible for Kiddush. So you're adding up two zeros, and two zeros doesn't add up. That's why those are machmir not to use concentrate. Now, there are poskim that say, what do you mean? But I'm making the same way it was earlier. But that's why they stopped making it from concentrate. If you do see concentrate added, that's only to enhance the flavor. They give it a stronger flavor, but essentially it's regular grape juice. Another point I want to mention, best before Pesach, people prefer, who don't like alcohol, they drink a light wine called matukal that has 3.5% alcohol. Now, when it first came out, people enjoy talking before knowing what the facts are. Well, they add water to the wine and they charge me for wine. I'll add my own water to my own wine. Why do I need their wine? That's not what they do. What they're doing is based on a very interesting calculation that typically a wine reaches the 13.5% is the maximum percentage of alcohol that wine ferments to. You could bring it up a little more if you distill it, but 13.5%. Based on a Gemara and a Mechaba, you could add 3 parts water to 1 part wine. That means you're left with, make the calculations, approximately 3.5% alcohol in this wine that you're drinking. So the wine manufacturers came up with an idea which was endorsed by many Gedolim. So why not make a wine and stop the fermentation process at 3.5%? So it's not that they added water, it's they made a wine that has the maximum of 3.5%. If you don't like it, don't use it. But you can't say it's water added. But the biggest hamtzah was a light grape juice. Light grape juice for those that are very sensitive to any bit of sugar, diabetes, or diets. So the light grape juice is a very light taste of grape juice. And it says in it 35% water and 50% less calories. Now, even if you're not a big mathematician, it doesn't stem. 30% water, so why 50% less calories? But this is another hamtzah of the wine manufacturers. Because they don't add 35% water to regular grape juice. They take an early harvest from grapes that at that point has very little sugar at that point, because the longer it stays, the longer sugar it is. It has a very tart, acidic flavor. So it has more grape flavor than a regular grape. So you could add 35% water, and it still has enough of a grape juice taste to qualify for a gofen, but it indeed is 50% less calories. Now, not all agree, because the mice, there's so much water in it, but it's not as bad as people make it. If you need it, that would be an option. I can talk to you all. Yeah, after.
Shaming I'd like to thank Rabbi Smith for the wonderful shir. The Sikum is met Hashem after Mincha. Rabbi say we lost here one of the biggest giants of Klal Yisrael, the Karlsberg Zatzal. He gave out thousands of sokim from this podium over here. It's one of the biggest soros. Nisve Tzadik geht weg, Ne'aron Nisve Tzadik, the Tzadik geht weg. Everybody from Klal Yisrael is in the hand of the Levias now. And we should all be zoiche that the schus of the tzaddikim, that we had so many tzaddikim that we lost this year. The Eibusha should have Rachmanas and Klal Yisrael. That we should have a big Yeshua. All we zoiche to be able to be Chag, the Chag Pesach mit Simcha, mit Feilige Herze, and everybody should have Yeshuas mit Tereshua v'Rachamim. Lono l'Chol Yisrael, Amen. We gaan naar Kasha hem, Rot Kushbach, Lazak, Solafik, Hebram, Termitzvah, Shanam, and Chovas, Man Sitka, Yagdol, Ter, V'Yade, Kaddish.